Hello everyone. I have been observing here for a little more than a year. I am familiar with many of your stories and have been learning a great deal from you all. I have never posted because, until recently, I have considered myself reconciled. But recent events have me reconsidering everything. I have created a throwaway account to post due to potential identifiable details in my main account. Here is the abbreviated version of our story. Before I get to the recent stuff, D-Day was spring 2017. Wife and I were both early 30s at the time, together since undergraduate, one primary school age child. I have become suspicious that my wife was having an extramarital relationship but was dismissed when I expressed concerns. Eventually, I confirmed my fears and confronted her with evidence. She continued to try to deny, but eventually confessed, cried, and begged for forgiveness. My immediate reaction was to ask her to leave and initiate a divorce. I would describe the sequence of events that led to discovery of the affair. My wife's affair never got actual in person, but there were plans to. A few months before D-Day, I noticed my wife have been more protective of her phone, angling away from me when using it, putting it away when I walk into the room, taking it to the bathtub or shower with her. I thought it was strange, but not a huge deal. No real suspicions at that point. There was one incident that really raised my eyebrows though. We have always had free use of each other's phone. If one of us ever say, "Hey, let me see your phone," we handed it over, no questions. One day, I wanted to look up a new restaurant that I wanted us to try, and my phone was charging, so I asked to see it. She asked why, and I told her, so she looked up the menu and showed me, but she never handed me her phone, just looked at it with me while she was holding it. Combined with the other behaviors, I started to get suspicious. After sitting on my concerns for a few days, I brought it up and asked her if there was something going on with someone else. She told me, of course, there wasn't, but one of her friends was going through something very personal and sensitive, and that she was trying to protect her friend's privacy. She assured me that she loved me and would never do anything to jeopardize us or our family. It was understandably that she would want to be a good friend, so I dropped it. But that sinking feeling in my gut kept telling me that something wasn't right. The sketchy behavior stopped. Well, I thought it did, but evidently, I just made her aware enough to not be so obvious. There was another big incident that really convinced me that something was going on. I will try to be tasteful here, but I think the details are significant. My apologies if any of the details are upsetting, and feel free to skip to the next paragraph if you weren't interested in the specifics. One afternoon, we were being intimate, and she grabbed her phone and wanted to record. This was unusual, as she's really reserved and has always been slightly uncomfortable with cameras, even out of the bedroom. So this was weird, but I thought maybe she wanted to add some excitement. I asked her what the deal with the camera was. She kind of sheepishly answered that she wanted to watch herself. I was glad to see a more adventurous urge, so I went with it. She began to perform mouth and record herself with her selfie camera, and she's really into it. She normally only performs this act when I ask, but she volunteered this time and was very enthusiastic, staring into the camera and making sensual noises. When it was over, she made a big display for the camera to show that she had swallowed the result, which was something that she never did as well. I know, I'm sorry, but this video is pretty important to the fallout. So this whole thing, the camera, the enthusiasm, and other things, we are all out of character, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. It was obviously an enjoyable experience for me, and I didn't want to shame her or make her feel bad for being adventurous. So I just carried on like normal and kind of hoped that we might continue down that road together. But I have been with my wife since we were 20, and this is very out of character for her, and it just stoked that gut feeling I had that something was amiss. On one occasion, a few weeks after the video incident, I was about to get her phone and looked through her messages and camera roll, but I didn't see anything that shouldn't be there. Some time later, I remember that we both used the feature on our phones that automatically backs up camera pictures to Google Photos. She had a user profile on my laptop, so I logged in and used her saved credential to access her Google account. Nothing unusual on her email, but my heart dropped when I opened her photos. There were a lot, and I mean a lot of lewd photos and extra videos backed up there, going back for about 4 months. I had never seen any of them, so they weren't taken for or sent to me. She had deleted them from her phone, but not from her backup, I guess. I booted up the video camera on her phone and scrolled the screen over what I found, in case she somehow remembered and deleted it before I confront her about it. I sat on the info for a few days, trying to give her the benefit of the doubt and think of any reason that those would be there. This was before OnlyFans really took off, but I thought maybe she was posting exy stuff online somewhere. But this would have been wildly out of character for her. Like I said, she's always been very private and reserved. I honestly couldn't conceive of any situation other than being involved with someone else that would account for this. I again told her that something was off with her and that I suspected that she was involved with someone else. I didn't tell her what I found, as I really hoped that she would have some explanation that would clear things up and make me look silly. She got a little indignant, telling me that we have been through this already and that of course there wasn't anything going on. I asked her again if there were anything that she wanted to get off her chest, and she again said no. I had accessed her Google account again in anticipation of this conversation, so I showed her everything that I have found and told her that she needed to explain all the extra content in her Google account. She looked a little shocked, but composed herself quickly and said that I have ruined the exy anniversary gift that she was intending to give me. Since we both have to leave town from time to time, she wanted me to have some spicy content from when we were apart. I didn't buy it. I bluffed and told her that her Google account wasn't the only thing I had access to, and if she didn't tell me the truth immediately, I would leave. She broke down crying, saying that it wasn't what it looked like. She was sorry, and that she didn't do anything, but was just being stupid. I asked her who he was, and she said he was a colleague. They met at a regional function for work late in 2016, about 7 months before D-Day. He works in the same position as she does at a different branch of the same company. It was in another major city in our state, about 200 miles away. They initially corresponded via email about work-related stuff, then exchanged numbers. She swore that her intention was just to share professional advice and tips, since he had been in that position for several years, why she just got promoted to that position, and that initially that was the nature of their correspondence. The text slowly got more personal, with him eventually initiating flirting, which she reciprocated. He recommended that they move their conversation to an encrypted messaging app. My impression is that this slimeball made a habit of pursuing married women, so they did. She deleted these initial exchanges, which is why I never found it, but the remainder of their exchange was still in the messaging app they used. I told her that I wanted to see it. She fought and cried and tried to get me not to look at it, but I reminded her that I was prepared to pack a bag and leave if she wasn't full forthcoming. So she opened the app, handed it over, and curled up in a ball with her head between her knees. The thread was disgusting. Very, very graphic actual messages, pictures, and videos. They both expressed excitement for an upcoming work event in the summer that would require a 2-night hotel stay, with graphic messages about what they intended to do to each other. As I'm reading all this, my mind jumps to the video I described earlier. I asked her if she sent it to him. She just started crying harder, so I scrolled up the thread until I find the video. They sent several messages back and forth about it, including him telling her how much he enjoyed pleasuring himself to it, and how hot she thought that was, and so on. Man, that really hit me hard. I felt so unbelievably violated by her sharing this video. Not only did she share a very private, intimate video of me in a very vulnerable act. For context, I have never taken a pee pic, much less sent one. Sharing this with anybody would have been a very big deal for me, much less someone she was involved with. But they also made me an unwilling participant in their ex-war relationship. Maybe not really, but it certainly felt like it. Looking back, it also really hurt to think that I was just a proxy for her and affair partner in the video, and all the adventurousness that I was excited to see was for him, not for me. So I left and told her that I wanted to divorce. She moved out, but continued to express her desire to work things out. I met a few divorce attorneys, and the divorce settlement would likely result in a big financial lifestyle hit, plus split time with the kiddo. After a detailed review of my finance and many conversations with my parents, mentor, and friends, I decided that divorce was the best option. I could likely recover from the financial losses in plenty of time to retire on time, and my daughter would be better off with happy parents than married parents if she couldn't have both. When I met with my wife to let her know that I have made the decision to start the divorce, she offered a deal, agreed to a trial separation of both a year to cool off and meet with a marriage counselor. Then if I still wanted to proceed, she would agree to mediate divorce with equal custody and a more favorable asset split. I thought it over and agreed. I told her that I intended to treat our separation as if I was single. We have been together for so long, and I was quite inexperienced when we started dating, so I felt like I needed experience to make a good decision about our future. I told her I would not be comfortable with her doing the same, and if she thought this was unfair or she was not comfortable with this asymmetry, then we could proceed with divorce. She wasn't happy but understood and ultimately agreed. I started dating pretty quickly and have a few casual relationships with women I knew. I met a woman at the gym that I saw romantically for a few months. I think my wife thought I was bluffing about the dating arrangement though, as she didn't handle things well. At our first marriage counseling appointment, we were introducing ourselves and explaining the circumstance. Marriage counselor asked if I was actively dating, and I said yes. My wife said something to the effect of, "I don't see any point in us doing this if you are effing other women." After the session, I told her I agreed and that I thought marriage counseling was a bad idea. She apologized and backtracked, but I told her that we could revisit the idea somewhere down the road. In the following months, she sent me periodic texts, usually late at night, asking how I could do this to her and if I hadn't punished her enough yet. After about a year and a half, I started leaning towards getting back together. We had been working well together as co-parents and spending family time together with our daughter. Aside from that, dating is awful. Maybe it was too soon, but it was so frustrating. I was meeting women and going second and even third dates, but I just couldn't imagine anything more than a casual relationship with any of them. I decided to stop dating after about a year of separation, and this opened the door to spending more time with my wife. In early 2019, I invited her to move back in so that we could live together as a family again. My daughter was over the moon. The parenting became the basis for rebuilding our relationship. I trust my wife so many ways. She's a great mother. I trust her to make good and responsible decisions financially. I want her to make medical decisions in the event I am unable to do so. But the romantic love just never came back. I no longer feel blessed to have her in my life. Our relationship is inadequate, I guess. It doesn't detract from my happiness, but it doesn't really contribute much to it either. I have always hoped that it would come back eventually, but we have been back together for over 4 years now, and I think this is likely as good as it will get. But for now, I am a prudent partner, and I get to be a dad every day. So that's enough. At least it was. Recent events have destabilized the relationship and I am kind of spiraling. During the aftermath of the affair, I leaned really heavily on my best friend. We have been best friends since we were teens, and I've been there through all the major life events like graduations, weddings, birth of children, and etc. Despite both having full lives, we work out together several times a week, and he really put me on his back during those initial months of our separation, keep tabs on me daily, held me accountable to take care of myself, made sure I drank responsibly, pretty much make sure I didn't turn to a drunk slob until I got my legs under me again. Well, around Thanksgiving last year, he became very distant. He couldn't keep our gym appointments or hang out at all. But I didn't think it was that unusual with the holidays, family, and work. We all get busy that time of the year. I would text to check in, and he would respond with terse messages or a thumbs up reaction. No big deal. He needed space, and I just made sure to check in and let him know that I cared and was there for him. In January, my wife came home and asked me why I didn't tell her that my best friend and his wife were divorcing. I had no idea what she was talking about. She told me that his wife had called her asking for advice on how she was able to move beyond her affair and convince me to stick out the marriage. She gave her pretty standard advice: full disclosure, transparency, patience, respect, and etc., and recommended some readings. She was outraged on his behalf. I really had to bite my tongue since she didn't seem to see the irony. I was crushed for him. I knew as well as everyone what he was going through, and I wondered why he didn't lean on me. He was awesome to me after my wife's affair, and he would have to know that I wouldn't judge him. So I started reaching out to him, inviting him to the gym, to get drinks, to play disco golf, all this stuff we used to do. Finally, he agreed to drink. We met, and he wasn't glad to see me at all. Really short and unfriendly. We talk. He finally started to let the story out, and he told me that at one point his wife told him, "Jake got over it. Why can't you?" And that affairs are parts of lots of marriages. His wife was incredulous, and he would want a divorce. I could tell he blamed me, at least partially. It cut like a knife. The idea that I contributed even to the smallest way to this terrible fate of being visited upon by a friend hurt almost as badly as my wife's affair did. Did me staying with my wife make this more likely? Does forgiving infidelity make it more acceptable? Can I help my friend at all? I tried to explain why I stayed, and that our relationship was very utilitarian at this point, that our marriage wasn't like it was before. But he didn't care. He's entitled to his anger, so I understand. This whole episode has reopened deep wounds. My wife and I haven't been intimating in 2 months. I can barely look in her eyes and recoil from the physical touch. I am seriously considering divorce again. My daughter is older now and is better equipped to handle a potential divorce. At this point, my daughter is old enough to express her wishes, and I know I can trust my wife to be a great co-parent, regardless of our relationship status. I really feel like we have been set back years at this point. I feel so guilty, and frankly, a little disgusted with myself. Has anyone else experienced this overwhelming guilt, especially this far along? How do you deal with it? I know intellectually that I am not responsible, but his judgment is weighing really heavily on me, as is the fact that I can't help him the way he helped me. I really just don't know what to do. Advice or encouragement is much appreciated. Update. Some of you asked me about the lack of connection that I feel with my wife, even after being back together for several years. And I wonder if maybe that part of me that felt connection and intimacy was just broken by the affair. During our conversation, access just felt empty. I remember laying there in bed after one weekend, thinking that I should be feeling something. I was with a beautiful woman, sharing a vulnerable and beautiful moment, but I just didn't feel anything. The whole time, I just wanted the connection and intimacy that access used to provide for my wife and I, but I just never did, which made me feel guilty and pretty bad about myself. I hoped that when my wife and I got back together, that I would finally feel the sense of satisfaction and connection again. But I wasn't with her either. All the physical stuff is good. Excess is pleasurable, but not satisfying. It feels like I am sleeping around with my wife, if it makes any sense. Things have gotten a little better with my wife since I posted. We have talked a little bit. She's perceptive and smart, so she knew what was bothering me. I asked her in particular why she felt like she could judge my friend's wife for doing the same thing that she did. She said that she didn't do the same thing. Mike's wife slept with someone else multiple times, and she never did. She evidently convinced herself that she never had any intention of having excess with a fair partner. I reminded her about the exchanges, and she said something like, I effed up and got carried away, but I wasn't really going to do anything. She doesn't get it. Or maybe I don't. I don't know. On the one hand, I know our story could be much worse. On the other hand, I feel really bad, even now, but at least we're talking. Some ask about therapy as well. We never resumed marriage counseling after the first meeting, though my wife continued individual counseling throughout our separation. There is considerably baggage in my family regarding mental health treatment. My grandmother was treated very badly by mental health professionals in a much less compassionate time, so that had made a big obstacle for me in seeing anybody for myself. Not really sure how to get past that. As for Mike, I'm giving him space, like you all suggested. I texted him that I love him, that I am sorry for what was happening to him, and that I will be there if he needed me. He responded with a thumbs up. Poor guy, I wish I could help him. Thanks again for you all for being a sounding board. I can't tell stuff like this to anyone in my life. Either they judge me or they judge my wife, and that doesn't help anybody. Advice and encouragement are appreciated again. Update. We had excess tonight for the first time since just after New Year and the incident with Mike and his wife. She had a few glasses of wine after work and initiated rather aggressively. She is and always has been a very beautiful woman, and my urge for physical release has been building significantly in recent weeks. There is also an added pressure as her affair proved that I am not a required component of her ex-life. Maybe preferred, but not necessary. So if I don't perform, someone else will. There was nothing loving or intimate about it. It was frantic, searching, maybe even primal. After it was over, I felt the immediate need to shower, which I did. Her feelings were hurt. They would have been hurt had I rejected her too. Not sure if that was a win on the board for me. Sorry to be a bummer, but I'm feeling pretty down on myself and us. Posting here helps. Thanks everyone. Update. So after my last post, after breaking the dry spell, and really any time I have posted, so many of you encouraged me to talk to my wayward wife. I know that you are all right about that, but talking about my emotions and needs, or really anything heavy, has always been incredibly difficult for me. My father always taught me that a man just needs to quietly deal with all the things that bother him and take care of his responsibilities because no one cares for how we feel. They only care about how useful you are to them. It's no wonder he died in his 50s. Things have been icy and awkward around the house since the last incident I posted about. I have been making myself pretty scarce to avoid the awkwardness, which is pretty easy since I work and go to the gym every day. And my daughter and I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu together. We both love it. And there is something going on the Jiu-Jitsu gym every night during the week and on Sunday afternoons. So she and I have been spending a lot of time together doing that, which has been awesome. Anyway, in early February, my mother's sister passed away. She lived in a neighboring state and had some family photos and heirlooms and personal effects that are important to my mother. And I volunteered to make the drive to pick those things. We had made the plans about 3 weeks ago. Wayward wife and I planned on making the trip together this past weekend. As we were getting ready to leave for work Friday, I reminded her about the Sunday trip plans and offered to make the drive alone. It's about 4.5 hours each way, so not great, but I have made the drive there back in the days before I told her that I would handle it. She said that she wanted to go, and I told her it really was okay, that I am sure that she had more productive way to spend her Sunday. And she said that she didn't mind keeping me company, but if I didn't want her to go, she would stay home. I told her, of course, I wanted her to go, and it's not that I didn't want her to go. I just knew that it was going to be uncomfortable. I got up early Sunday morning, got our daughter settled with my mother for the day. I returned home to pick up my wife and hit the road. The first hour of the drive was pretty quiet. She had just woken up and isn't really a morning person. We stopped for breakfast, and after we ate and had caffeine, we chatted a bit, mostly about our daughter and work. Then things started to go sideways. We were just talking, nothing super serious, small talk type stuff. Then she asked me how Mike was doing. I told her I didn't know. She was confused because she knows how close we have always been. And I told her that I haven't spoken to him since we met for drinks a few months ago. She asked if something happened that caused us to fall out. And I said no, we have just both been busy and haven't been able to connect. I tried to change the subject, but she wouldn't let it go. She started to give me a hard time, telling me that he's going through something incredibly difficult with his wife's affair and the divorce, and suggesting that I was being a bad friend and that she was disappointed that I hadn't been there for him. I almost lost my temper, but I didn't. I just told her that I didn't want to talk anymore and turned up my podcast. But I knew this conversation had to happen eventually. I had always been better at formulating my thoughts in writing rather than extemporaneously, so I have been preparing for this conversation by posting here, which had been helpful, but also keeping a journal where I would write questions that I needed answers and write out things that I wanted to communicate. I know I can be stubborn, but everyone's advice here really had made a difference. So I just took a few minutes to collect myself. Then I turned down the stereo and told her about what happened when Mike and I met, that his wife told him that he needed to get over it, like I did, and how cheating is a normal part of marriage now, and that he was overreacting. I told her how he told me that he thought she was right, at least in part, and people staying with cheaters make cheating more acceptable. And if his wife had seen my wife face the consequences of losing her marriage, that maybe she wouldn't have done what she did. I also told her how Mike's divorce and that conversation with him had opened my old wounds and had me thinking a lot about her affair and our marriage. She got somewhat indignant and defensive, like she always does, talking trash about Mike's, and once again objected to me using the word affair to describe her relationship with her coworker. This is sort of her playbook to avoid difficult conversations. So I told her to forget it, that I made a mistake to say anything, and that we should enjoy the tree and sunflowers. So I turned the radio back on, and we suffered through a really awkward half an hour or so of silence. I guess she cooled off because she apologized and said that she wanted to talk. I told her fine, go ahead. She asked me if I still loved her. I answered honestly and told her that I wasn't sure. She told me that she knew that I did. I asked her how she could possibly know that, since I couldn't even answer. And she told me, love is a verb. It's corny, I know, but we are both huge John Mayer fans. And she said that she felt loved. She told me that doing what it took to keep our family intact, being a great dad, taking care of my responsibilities every day, opening our home to her even during our separation. She told me that even when things were at their worst with us, she knew that she could depend on me without questions if ever she needed me, and she always felt like she and our daughter were safest when they were with me. She said all those things were acts of love, and as long as she felt loved by me, then I was loving her. Then she asked me if I thought she loved me. I told her that I knew she did, that her life would likely be easier if she decided to leave, and that love would be the reason why she had continued on with me. But I seriously questioned how she could love me when she jeopardized our family during her affair. I told her that there must be some insufficiency with me that caused her to become involved with someone else. and I couldn't understand why she never addressed things with me. And I told her that she should have left rather than cheated. She got pretty upset at this and told me that she never considered leaving. It wasn't even on the table because she loved me so much. I explained that I had really difficult time seeing any congruity or logic to what she was saying, and I asked her why she would develop a relationship with another man if she wasn't unhappy. I asked her if I didn't give her enough attention to make her feel beautiful and loved. She said that I didn't do anything wrong, but that she just started to take those things for granted from me. We have been together so long that as part of the status quo, that maybe I did all those things for her out of some sense of duty or obligation. She also said that she always been a bit insecure in our relationship, that she always noticed the attention I got from women, and that it made her feel a little bad about herself, like she wasn't anything special to me. If she wasn't there, I would have had a lot of options. That was one of the things that drew her to her affair partner. He was a good deal older than us, short, balding, pudgy, pretty much the physical opposite of me in a lot of ways. She said she saw pictures of his wife. She was rather average looking, middle aged woman. Nothing wrong with her at all. But my wife was younger and more attractive, and she felt like something special to him. So his attention made her feel really good about herself, that she really enjoyed the lustful, almost obsessive attention that he gave her. She knew that she was the only thing like that in his life, and it felt almost like a drug. I asked her if she ever suspected or worried about me cheating on her, and she said no. She knew that I wouldn't cheat on her, that even if I wanted to, my sense of loyalty and commitment wouldn't allow me to. She still thought I was bluffing about dating others during our separation until I actually started doing it, which was why she got so upset and really couldn't believe I actually did it. I asked her why I didn't deserve equal measure of loyalty and commitment, and she insisted that she had been loyal and committed and that she would never sleep with anyone else. I reminded her that the messages that I saw in their chat thread about their plans to meet and sleep together at their company regional event, and she said that she was just gassing him up and that her company wasn't even going to send her to the meeting that year. I guess it was a rotating thing who would go from year to year. She just had to keep him believing to keep the supply of attention coming. I asked her if she was attracted to the AP, and she laughed and said no. I told her that what she was saying didn't make sense to me, that it seemed to me that all of these things she was saying could not be true at the same time. She compared her texting relationship with P graphic use, that a man might watch PRN to build his extra energy and excitement in anticipation for excess with his partner, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love his partner or would rather be with someone else. She said that was basically what she got out of her affair partner. She felt exy and got excited by all the attention that she got from him. And then she enjoyed XX with me that much more because of it. She asked me to think back to before D-Day and how intense XY relationship was then and how much assertive and enthusiastic she was. She said that the affair just helped her feel so good about herself that she couldn't get enough of me. She said none of that had anything to do with him. These are evidently all the issues that she's been working on in therapy. I have never done therapy. Therapy things have been a big struggle. There's a pretty serious history of mental illness in my father's side of the family. My dad suffered pretty significant mental illness, but he functioned okay most of the time, with only periodic outbreak of delusion. His mother, however, was much worse and had to be institutionalized several times since she was a legitimate threat to family and herself. She was going through the system in the 60s and 70s, and the profession's understanding of mental illness and people afflicted was not what it is today. So my dad grew up seeing his mother treated very, very badly by doctors and hospitals, and that passed on through me. He was always afraid. He never wanted to see a doctor. I was always afraid that my dad was going to be taken away from us when he had a flare up. And so I guess I just always view mental health professionals with distrust. Fortunately, I don't suffer the same issue my dad and grandma did, and I am past the age where I would expect to see symptoms appear. I think that's why I was so quick to bail out on marriage counseling after just one meeting. I was looking for a reason. I had two initial meetings with therapists for myself, and I was just so ill at ease that I didn't go back. I am not sure how to get over all this baggage. Therapy would probably help, so she just could be telling me what she thinks makes her look better. I don't know. At about that point in the conversation, we arrived at our destination. We gathered my aunt's things and hung out with my uncle for a couple of hours. It always feels strange going through someone's possessions after they pass away. I noticed it first when my father passed away. All their things are with you, but they aren't, and their whole lived life is just boiled down to their stuff. And so many things that seemed like there would be no reason to keep, but that they had reasons enough for, but we would never know what it was. Things were somber on the way home. Going through my aunt's stuff was difficult, and we were both digesting a lot of what we talked about. Plus, it was a very long day, and we were both very tired by that point. We talked a little more about our relationship and the possibility of going to marriage counseling. I am still reluctant, but told her I would give it some serious consideration. I really don't know what to make of this stuff about her affair and affair partner. Do I believe it? If so, does it make me feel better or worse? I don't know yet, but at least we talk more substantively than we have in a long time. I think driving helped, since we didn't have to look directly at each other, kind of like a confession booth. It feels much better having some of the cards on the table. Maybe we can start moving forward together now. Whether it meant a better marriage or a divorce, at least it's progress. I am encouraged though, because we both pushed through the discomfort to have the conversation. I didn't shut down, and she got over her defensiveness. And both of those things have always prevented conversations before. Maybe I'm part of the problem with her minimizing things. I am not saying that what she did wasn't that bad. It absolutely was, and it continues to endanger relationships. But Mike's wife affair was significantly worse, in my view. She slept with a mutual friend of her and her husband. They would all hang out together, and her husband would interact with him as a friend during the affair. She also evidently has several sexual encounters with her affair partner in their shared home and in their bed. I had no doubt that had my wife had done anything approaching that level of disrespect, I would have ended things without hesitation. I really think that if she had had a physical, in-person relationship with a fair partner, I would have ended things. Regarding other betrayed spouse, yes, that portion of the conversation did trouble me. But to my wife's credit, she did blow the whistle about the affair to HR. They had a policy against fraternization. And to his wife, I told her that if she didn't, that I was going to, and that she needed to do the right thing if I were to consider delaying divorce proceedings. So I am not sure how much credit she deserves. Wayward wife decided to leave the job anyway when things blew up. Otherwise, she would have likely been fired too. Maybe not, since he was senior to her and operated as a professional mentor. But it would have been trouble, so he was fired. And from what I gather, other betrayed spouse divorced him. Thanks for the comments, and I appreciate your advice and insight. And hopefully, this will foster more productive conversation in the future. I don't think I would have gotten past in my end without all the support and advice I've gotten here. So thanks, everyone.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias. Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sara tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sara y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sara quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sara completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sara se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sara quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sara era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Thyssen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber, los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Thyssen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sara había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sara llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, Pren, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre Pren antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. Ion, ¿dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes, te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al Hotel Dicen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Dicen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet, era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso. Que el ascensor se detuviera en el tercer piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al 7º piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación. Todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador. Aparte de esos 2 objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del Listen. ¿Ion? Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije. Hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje. Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales. La mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche. Me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado. Dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Joss me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones, intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre, aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente, Joss y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales, 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco, parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas, había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200,000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos, Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Joss casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento, se negó. Por lo general, trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche, no había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta, los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse, no hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marche Simmons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sara hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. Ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sara no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marchen no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Josh en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sara. probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sara era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sara, parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Sherry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sara. Sherry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, John. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sara se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. Compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Sherry. Sherry alquilaba una habitación de Sara. Cada centavo que Sara ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Sherry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sara no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Sherry explicó que Sara estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Sherry dijo que Sara no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sara hablaba mucho de mí pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Sherry por $1 y obtuve $3,000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foote resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sara y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sara conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.